3 years had passed since the battle that saved the Velith homeworld. Archivist Yan Su stood before the completed memorial at the heart of the capital city and watched as morning light filtered through the crystalline spires that bore 4,000 human names. Each name had been carefully etched into living crystal that would grow and resonate for as long as the Velith civilization endured. Each name was accompanied by its pronunciation in light patterns so that every Velith child could speak it properly. The sky above was blue again. Human atmospheric processors and Velith engineering had worked together to filter the toxins from the air, and the brown death that had hung over everything was finally gone. The crystal forests were growing back in colors that had not been seen for generations, and the water sang once more with bioluminescent life. 800 million Velith had survived the darkest period in their history, and now there were 850 million. As the population began to recover, Yan Su turned away from the memorial and walked through streets that buzzed with activity and hope. Human volunteers still walked among the Velith and worked alongside them on reconstruction projects that would take decades to complete. Many had chosen to stay permanently and make this wounded world their new home. Dr. Minji Kang was one of them. Yan Su found her at the Medical Research Center. She had helped establish where human and Velith scientists worked together on treatments that combined the best of both species' knowledge. Archivist Yan Su, she said, with the warm smile that had become so familiar. I received your message about the memorial dedication ceremony, and I will be there. I wanted to speak with you before that. Yan Su said, I am completing the official historical record of humanity's intervention, and I need your words for the conclusion. Dr. Kang set down the instrument she had been calibrating and gave Yan Su her full attention. What do you want me to say? I want you to explain why you stayed. Yan Su said, you could have returned to Earth after the crisis passed and resumed your life there, and instead, you chose to remain on a world that is not yours, among a species that is not your own. Dr. Kang was quiet for a long moment, and her expression showed the complex emotions that Yan Su had learned to read over 3 years of friendship. When I first came here, I thought I was helping strangers. She said, I thought I would do my part and then go home and feel good about what we had accomplished. What changed? Yan Su asked. You did. Dr. Kang said simply, all of you in this world, and this became home, and you became my people. And I cannot imagine living anywhere else. She reached out and touched Yan Su's crystalline appendage with the gentle familiarity of long friendship. That is what humans do. She said, we adopt and are adopted, and we form bonds that nothing can break, and this is where I belong now. The Galactic Assembly had changed in the 3 years since the battle. Humanity had been granted full membership, despite the objections of several species who still feared what the Deathworlders might become. More importantly, the story of what happened at the Velith homeworld had spread to every corner of known space. Other species had begun to quietly seek human assistance when the Assembly turned them away. A mining colony facing environmental collapse had received human engineers who worked for months to stabilize their atmosphere. A refugee population fleeing war had found human ships waiting with food and medical supplies and offers of settlement. A world suffering from a plague that the Assembly had deemed too expensive to treat had been visited by human doctors who worked until a cure was found. Not every intervention was as dramatic as the Velith rescue, and not every crisis required battle, but the pattern was clear. When someone called for help, humanity answered. The Assembly observer who had watched the battle with such confusion had submitted a report that was now studied in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. Humans are not dangerous because of their strength or their aggression. The report concluded, they are dangerous because they form attachments that override all other considerations. And once they decide to protect something, they will fight until nothing remains of themselves or their enemies. The traditional Response to such a species would be isolation and containment. However, the events of the Velith homeworld suggest a different approach. Perhaps instead of fearing what humans will do when angered, we should consider what they will do when befriended. Captain Zeojin Park had survived their injuries, though they now walked with a permanent limp and carried scars that would never fully heal. They had returned to Earth to receive honors and awards, and then had quietly requested transfer back to the Velith sector. "Why would you come back?" Yansu had asked when the captain arrived. "Because the job is not finished," Park had said, "and because I made friends here that I am not willing to leave." The memorial dedication ceremony drew crowds from across the planet and representatives from a dozen other species who had traveled to witness the event. Yansu stood before the gathered assembly and prepared to deliver the conclusion of the historical record. 3 years ago, our world was dying and the galaxy had abandoned us. Yansu began. "We sent a signal into the unknown and asked if anyone cared about the fate of strangers. Humanity answered. They came with ships and supplies and volunteers and hope, and when an enemy arrived to destroy them, they fought with a ferocity that changed how the galaxy understands courage. 4,000 humans died defending people they had never met before. They gave everything and asked nothing in return." Yansu paused and let their light patterns express the emotions that words could not capture. The Galactic Assembly classified humans as Category 7 Deathworlders. Yansu continued. "They warned us that these beings were dangerous and unpredictable and should be avoided. They were wrong. Humans are not monsters, and they are not threats, and they are not the enemies the galaxy feared. They are what every civilization should aspire to become. They are those who come when called." The crowd responded with colors of agreement and gratitude that filled the air with light. Dr. Kang stood with the other humans who had made the Velith world their home, and Yansu saw tears on her face after the ceremony. Yansu found a quiet moment with the humans who had gathered to pay respects to their fallen comrades. "I have a question," Yansu said to Captain Park. "A question I have been thinking about since the day you first arrived." "Ask it," Park said. "You told me once that humans help because it is what you do." Yansu said, "But the galaxy is vast and suffering is endless, and you cannot answer every call." "No." Park agreed. "We cannot. Then how do you choose?" Yansu asked. "How do you decide who receives help and who does not?" Captain Park was silent for a long time, and their expression showed the weight of a question they had clearly considered many times. "We answer as many as we can." They finally said, "We send ships and people and resources to every call we can reach, and we accept that we will fail sometimes, and we carry the guilt of those we could not save. That is a heavy burden." Yansu observed. "It is," Park agreed. "But the alternative is to feel nothing and do nothing and become the kind of species that can watch others suffer without caring. We would rather carry the guilt of failure than the shame of indifference." The sun set over the memorial, and the crystal spires caught the fading light and scattered it across the city in patterns of red and gold. 4,000 names glowed in the twilight, and each one spoke of a life given freely for the sake of strangers. Somewhere across the galaxy, a signal was broadcasting into the darkness, a call for help from a species facing extinction or disaster or war. And somewhere, a human ship was receiving that signal, and a human captain was giving the order to change course. "We are coming." They would say, "Hold on," because that is what humans do. The answer Yansu added the final notation to the historical record. This concludes the official account of humanity's response to the Velith distress signal and the events that followed. Let it be known to all who read these words that when we were alone and dying and forgotten by the galaxy, we called into the darkness for help. And humanity came, not for reward or territory or power, but simply because we asked. They are not Deathworlders. They are not monsters. They are something the galaxy has never seen before. They are hope, They are humanity, and they are our friends. The Korath fleet arrived on the sixth day exactly as predicted, and Archivist Yansu watched from the planetary command center as 94 warships took position around the Velith homeworld, the site of so much military power should have inspired terror, but Yansu found their attention drawn to the 12 human combat vessels that moved to intercept. 12 against 94. The mathematics were impossible, and every tactical analysis confirmed that the human defenders would be destroyed within hours. Korath Fleet Commander Vyarkath opened communications with a broadcast that reached every receiver on the planet. Humans, you are trespassing in Korath space and interfering with Korath interests. The commander announced, "You have 1 standard hour to withdraw or face annihilation, and this is your only warning." Captain Seojin Park responded from the bridge of the human flagship. "Fleet Commander, this world is under the protection of humanity," Park said with a voice that carried no fear. "The Velith people asked for our help, and we answered, and we will not abandon them." "You are 12 ships against 94, Voraketh said, with what the translation software identified as amusement. "This is not protection, and this is suicide." "Perhaps," Captain Park acknowledged. "But we are humans, and we have never been good at knowing when to give up. Then you will die for strangers who cannot save themselves." The commander said, "There are worse things to die for." Park replied, "Leave this system or learn why our world made us what we are." The communication ended, and the hour began. Yansu stood beside Counselor Tae-1 and the other Velith leaders as they watched the human vessels arrange themselves in defensive formation. "They should retreat." Counselor Tae-1 said, "They have done more for us than anyone else in the galaxy, and they owe us nothing more, and they should save themselves." But even as the counselor spoke, the human civilian ships were moving into position around the station, around the Velith population centers, medical vessels, and agricultural transports and engineering ships, with no weapons at all, were placing themselves between the enemy fleet and the people they had come to save. Dr. Minji Kang refused the evacuation order that would have taken her to safety. "I have patients in treatment," she told the military coordinator. "I am not leaving them. Dr. The Korath may target the surface installations," the coordinator warned. "Then I will die with my patients," Dr. Kang said. "But I will not abandon them, and that is final." The hour passed, and Fleet Commander Vyarkath gave the order to attack. What followed changed how every species in the galaxy understood humanity. The first wave of Korath fighters swept toward the human defensive line and expected the small force to scatter or retreat. Instead, the human ships accelerated directly into the enemy formation. Yansu watched the tactical display in disbelief as human pilots flew their vessels with a precision and aggression that defied all tactical doctrine. They did not target the fighters but drove past them toward the larger warships behind. The Korath commanders had expected a defensive engagement, where they could use their superior numbers to overwhelm the humans gradually. Instead, they found themselves fighting opponents who attacked without regard for their own survival. A human destroyer took 17 direct hits while closing on a Korath cruiser and continued firing until both vessels were destroyed. A squadron of human fighters flew directly into the engine exhaust of an enemy battleship and detonated their remaining weapons at point-blank range. Ship after ship fell, but each human vessel took enemies with it, and the Korath fleet that had expected easy victory found itself bleeding. The battle lasted 18 hours. 18 hours of constant engagement where human crews fought in rotating shifts and refused to stop even when their ships were crippled and burning. Yansu recorded testimony from a Korath pilot who was captured when his fighter was disabled near the planet's surface. "We hit their ships with everything we had," the pilot said with colors of confused terror. "We crippled their engines and destroyed their weapons and opened their hulls to vacuum, and they kept fighting." "They kept fighting?" Yansu asked. "With handheld weapons," the pilot said. "Through the holes in their own ships and in suits that were leaking atmosphere, and they would not stop, and we killed them, and they would not stop. By hour 12, the Korath had destroyed or disabled 8 human combat vessels, but the humans had crippled or destroyed 51 Korath ships. The mathematics no longer made sense, and Fleet Commander Vioketh found himself facing opponents who fought harder when losing rather than breaking. As expected, human reinforcements were not coming, and everyone knew it. The 12 ships were all that humanity had sent, and when they were gone, there would be nothing left. But the humans fought as if victory was certain and death was merely an inconvenience in the 14th hour. Captain Park's flagship took a direct hit that destroyed the primary bridge. Park was pulled from the wreckage with severe burns and multiple fractures. The medical team wanted to sedate the captain and begin emergency treatment. "No," Park said through obvious pain. "Take me to the secondary bridge, and I am not finished." "Captain, you will die if you do not receive treatment," the lead medic warned. "Then I will die on my feet with my hands on the controls," Park replied. "These people trusted us, and I will not leave them while I can still fight." Park continued commanding the battle from a chair that had to be specially modified to support their broken body. In the 16th hour, the Korath fleet suffered a crisis of morale. Varaketh had lost more than half his effective fighting force to an enemy that should have been destroyed in the first hour. His remaining ships were damaged and his crews were exhausted, and every pilot who engaged the humans came back with stories of impossible ferocity. They do not surrender. One captain reported with voice thick with fear, "We disable their ships, and they continue to fire, and we breach their hulls. And they fight with hand weapons, and they never stop and never run and never give up. They are Deathworlders." Varaketh said. "We knew this. No, Fleet Commander," the captain replied. "They are something worse, and they believe they are right, and that belief makes them unstoppable." In the 18th hour, Varaketh made a decision that would echo through galactic history. He ordered his remaining 43 ships to withdraw the Korath. Dominion had never retreated from an inferior force in their entire history, but they had never faced humans before, Captain. Park's voice came over the open channel as the enemy fleet turned away. "I told you we were not leaving," the captain said. And despite the pain and exhaustion, there was something like satisfaction in those words. The human cost was devastating. 8 ships destroyed and 4,000 human lives lost in defense of a species they had met only weeks before. 4,000 people who had left their homes and traveled across the galaxy and died so that strangers could live. The surviving human vessels limped back to orbit around the Velith homeworld, and emergency crews began rescue operations. Dr. Kang worked for 36 hours straight treating wounded humans and Velith alike, and only collapsed when her own body finally refused to continue. Archivist Yan Su found Captain Park in the medical bay surrounded by the other wounded officers. "Why?" Yan Su asked, because it was the only question that mattered. Park looked up with eyes that had seen too much death and carried too much pain. "Because you asked," the captain said simply. "Because you needed help, and we could give it, and that is what humans do. 4,000 of your people are dead," Yan Su said, "and 800 million of yours are alive," Park replied. "That is a trade we will make every time and never regret." Yan Su's crystal body rang with frequencies they could not name. "The galaxy will hear of this," they promised. "Good," Captain Park said with a weak smile. "Maybe they will learn something." The news of the approaching Korath fleet spread through the human camps like fire through dry grass. Archivist Yan Su expected panic and evacuation orders and the rapid departure of the 47 vessels that had brought hope to a dying world. Instead, the humans called a meeting. Captain Seo Jin Park stood before an assembly of human officers and specialists and volunteers and delivered the situation report with the same calm voice that had promised help 37 days ago. The Korath Dominion is sending 94 warships to remove us from this system, the captain said. They will arrive in approximately 6 standard days, and they have made clear that they will destroy anyone who interferes with their claim on Vela space. A murmur passed through the assembled humans, but Yansu could not identify the emotion behind it. Our combat capability consists of 12 vessels with adequate weapons and trained crews. Captain Park continued. The mathematics of this situation are not favorable. What are our orders, Captain? A young officer asked from the front of the assembly captain. Park's expression shifted to something that made Yansu's crystal body resonate with an unfamiliar frequency. Our orders are the same as they have been since we received the Volith distress signal, the captain said. We came to help these people, and we will not abandon them, and if the Korath want us to leave, they will have to make us. Yansu waited for objections or arguments or demands for retreat, but none came to us. Humans simply nodded and returned to their work as if facing a fleet 8 times their size was merely another problem to solve. Later that evening, Archivist Yansu found Dr. Minji Kang sitting alone near one of the medical stations and staring at the brown sky. Your people confuse me, Yansu admitted as they settled beside the human. The Galactic Assembly advised you to withdraw and offered diplomatic cover for a strategic retreat, and your own military analysis suggests defeat is certain, and yet you stay. Dr. Kang did not respond immediately, and her face showed the complex expression that Yansu had learned indicated deep emotion. There was a saying among my people, she finally said. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. But we are not your friends, Yansu said. We are strangers who called into the darkness and you answered. That makes you our friends, Dr. Kang said with a small smile. Perhaps the truest kind of friends because we chose to know you, and you chose to trust us, and that is how the best friendships begin. She turned to look directly at Yansu, and her wet eyes reflected the dim light of the dying world. Let me tell you about humans, she said. Let me tell you why we came and why we stay. Yansu activated their recording device because they sensed that this was information the archive needed to preserve. Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day. Dr. Kam began. Our planet has extreme temperatures and natural disasters and predators and diseases and 1,000 other ways to die, and somehow we survived. The assembly files say your homeworld is classified as a Category 7 death world. Yansu noted, they are correct, Dr. Kang said. But they missed the point of what that means and what it made us. She picked up a small stone from the ground and held it between her soft fingers. The same world that tried to kill us also taught us that survival is not enough, she said. We learned very early that alone we are weak, but together we can face anything, and that the bonds between people are stronger than any weapon or shield. Your people value cooperation, Yansu said. This is not unusual among sentient species. No, Dr. Kang agreed. What is unusual is how far we extend that cooperation, and to whom. She set the stone down and turned to face Yansu fully. Humans have a trait that the galaxy does not understand, she said. We form bonds with anything and anyone, and once we decide that something belongs to us or that we belong to it, we will fight and die to protect it. Belong to it? Yansu asked, uncertain of the meaning. Your distress signal reached us across impossible distances, Dr. Kang said. You called for help, and we heard you, and in that moment you became ours, and we became yours, and now nothing in the universe can make us abandon you. But you barely know us. Yansu protested. Your people have been here less than a month, and you face death for strangers. Dr. Kang smiled again. But this time, the expression carried weight and sorrow. Let me tell you about human history, she said. Let me tell you why the guilt we carry makes us who we are. She spoke for a long time about wars and famines and genocides and the countless times humans had failed to help each other when help was needed. She spoke about people who had called for rescue and been ignored, and about suffering that could have been prevented if anyone had cared enough to act. We remember every failure, she said. We teach our children about the times we looked away and did nothing, and every generation swears that they will do better. And have you? Yansu asked. Done better? Sometimes, Dr. Kang said. Not always and not enough, but we keep trying because the alternative is to become the kind of species that can watch others suffer and feel nothing. She gestured at the human camps spread across the Velith landscape. These people left everything behind to come here, she said. They left families and careers and comfortable lives, because somewhere in the universe, someone was dying and asking for help, and they could not live with themselves if they did nothing. The Galactic Assembly observer approached them with an expression of frustrated confusion. I've been trying to understand your species for 6 days, the observer said. Your behavior defies all logical analysis, and you face destruction for no strategic gain, and you expend resources with no expectation of return, and the Assembly cannot determine your true motivation. Dr. Kang stood and faced the observer with the same hardness that Captain Park had shown days before. Our motivation is simple, she said. We help because we can, and because it is right, and because the universe is cold and dark and terrifying, and the only way to survive it is to hold on to each other. That is not a motivation, the observer insisted. That is sentiment, and sentiment does not drive policy. For humans it does, Dr. Kang said. For humans, sentiment is the only thing that truly matters, and everything else is just details. The observer retreated in confusion, and Yansu recorded the exchange. I begin to understand, Yansu said when they were alone again. Your people are not dangerous because of your strength or your aggression, and you are dangerous because you care too much. Yes, Dr. Kang said. And when we care about something, we become capable of things that terrify the galaxy. What things? Yansu asked Dr. Kang, looked toward the stars where the Korath fleet was approaching. You will see in 6 days, she said. And then you will understand why the galaxy fears us, and why that fear is not entirely wrong. Captain Park's voice came over the communication system, calling all personnel to duty stations. The Korath have accelerated their approach, the captain announced. All combat personnel prepare for engagement, and all civilian personnel continue. Your work and we will handle the fighting, and you handle the saving. Dr. Kang squeezed Yansu's crystalline appendage gently. I have patience to see, she said. Record everything, Archivist, and make sure the galaxy knows what happened here. I will, Yansu promised, as the human doctor walked away to continue healing the sick. Yansu added a notation to the archive. Day 43. Of human contact in the Korath. Approach, and the humans refuse to leave, and I understand now why the galaxy calls them dangerous, and they are dangerous. Because they love too easily, and fight too hard, and never know when to surrender, and these are not the traits of monsters, and these are the traits of something far more terrifying. Heroes. Archivist Yansu stood at the landing field with the other members of the welcoming delegation and tried to control the fear colors that kept flickering across their crystalline body. The humans would arrive today. 37 days had passed since Captain Park had promised help, and the Velith had spent every moment preparing for what they assumed would be a small delegation of perhaps one ship with a few specialists. When the first human vessel appeared in the upper atmosphere, Yansu felt a small measure of relief that at least something had come. Then the second ship appeared, and the third, and the 10th, and the 20th. Yansu stopped counting at 47, because their mind could not process what their optical receptors were showing them. The sky filled with human vessels of every size and configuration, and they descended through the poisoned brown clouds. Like a swarm of metal creatures answering some ancient call, Counselor Taewon made a sound of pure terror. Beside Yeon-su, they have sent an invasion fleet. The counselor whispered with colors of absolute panic, but Alchemist Yeon-su was studying the ships more carefully and noticed something strange. Many of them had markings that translated to words like medical and agricultural support, and engineering corps and volunteer relief. These were not warships. As the vessels landed and the doors opened, and the humans began to emerge, Yeon-su experienced their first direct contact with the species the galaxy called monsters. Humans were smaller than expected, with soft bodies covered in fabric and skin that showed no natural armor or weapons. Their faces moved constantly with expressions that shifted faster than Velith could process, and their eyes were small and wet and strangely intense. Captain Seo-jin Park approached the delegation with hands raised in what the translation software identified as a gesture of peace. "Thank you for trusting us," Captain Park said, and their voice carried a warmth that the Velith had not expected. "I know you have heard frightening things about my people, but I promise we are here only to help." Counselor Taewon managed to find their diplomatic voice, despite the fear colors still rippling across their form. "We are grateful for your response to our distress signal," Taewon said, "but we must confess that we did not expect such a large response, and we have nothing to offer in exchange for this assistance." Captain Park tilted their head in a gesture that the translation software could not interpret. "We did not come for payment," the captain said. "We came because you asked for help." Before Taewon could respond, a young human female approached with equipment in her arms and determination on her face. "Archivist Yeon-su?" she asked, pronouncing the name carefully. Yeon-su stepped forward in surprise that this human knew their designation. "I am Yeon-su." They confirmed. The human smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face into something almost warm. "I am Dr. Minji Kang, and I am a xenobiologist, and I have spent the entire journey learning to communicate in light patterns," she said. Then she did something that made Yeon-su's crystal body ring with shock. Dr. Kang activated a device attached to her arm and produced a pattern of light that formed the Velith greeting for honored friend. The pattern was imperfect and slightly off in frequency, but it was recognizable and it was respectful. And it meant that this human had spent 37 days learning to say hello in a language that must have been completely alien to her. "The light frequencies caused me some eye strain," Dr. Kang admitted with another smile, "but I wanted to be able to speak with my patients in their own language." Yeon-su could not find words for several long moments. "You learned our language," they finally said. "You learned to speak in light for us." "Of course," Dr. Kang said, as if this was the most natural thing in the universe. "How else could I understand what you need?" The humans spread across the planet with a speed and organization that stunned every observer. Medical teams established treatment centers within hours and began analyzing Velith biology to develop protocols for toxin removal. Agricultural specialists examined the dying crystal forests and started testing methods to neutralize the poison in the soil. Engineers deployed atmospheric processors that hummed with unfamiliar technology and promised to clean the very air the Velith breathed. And everywhere there were volunteers. Humans who were not scientists or soldiers or specialists, but ordinary people who had left their homes and their jobs and their families on Earth to help strangers on a dying world. Archivist Yeon-su followed Dr. Kang as she worked and recorded everything for the historical archive. "I must ask a question that has troubled my people since we received your first response," Yeon-su said during a brief rest period. "The Galactic Assembly refused to help us because we had nothing of strategic value to offer them, and your people have come with 47 ships and thousands of personnel and technology and supplies. And you say you want nothing in return, and I do not understand. Dr. Kang was quiet for a moment, and her face showed the shifting expressions that Yansu was beginning to recognize as deep thought. That is a difficult question to answer, she said, because the answer does not translate well into any language except the one that humans carry in their hearts. She looked out at the brown sky and the dying landscape and the Velith children, who had gathered to watch the strange soft beings work. We came because you were suffering, she said. We came because you asked and because we could and because it was the right thing to do, and no other reason matters. A Galactic Assembly observer vessel had arrived to monitor the human activity, and its crew watched with expressions of disbelief and suspicion. The observer captain approached Captain Park with demands for explanation. What is your true purpose here? The observer asked. No species expends resources on this scale without expectation of return. And what do you want from the Velith? Captain Park's expression shifted to something hard and cold that gave Yansu a brief glimpse of why the galaxy feared these beings. We want them to live, Captain Park said. That is all, and that is enough. And if you can't understand that, then perhaps the Assembly should ask itself why monsters are more willing to help than civilized species. The observer had no response to this on the 7th day of human presence. A young Velith child approached Dr. Kang while she was calibrating medical equipment. The child's crystal body was clouded with toxins, and their light patterns were weak and fading. Why did you come? The child asked. My teachers said that no one in the galaxy cared about us. Dr. Kang knelt down to meet the child's optical receptors at their level. Your teachers were wrong, she said gently. We cared and we came, and that is what matters. But why? The child pressed with the persistence of the young. Why do you care about people you never met? Dr. Kang's eyes grew wet with what Yansu had learned was called tears. Because once upon a time my people were alone and suffering, and we wished someone would come to help us, she said. No. One came, and we had to save ourselves, and we nearly failed, and we lost so many, and we decided that if we survived, we would never let another species feel that alone. She reached out and gently touched the child's dimming crystals. You called for help, and we heard you, and we came, she said. That is all the reason we need. Yansu recorded the exchange and added it to the archive. Then a priority alert interrupted everything. The Korath Dominion had detected the human presence in what they considered their territory, and they were sending a war fleet to remove the interference. 94 Korath warships against 12 human combat vessels. Captain Park received the news with a calm that bordered on terrifying. Then we have work to do, the captain said, and not much time to do it. When asked if the humans would withdraw, Dr. Kang answered for everyone. We did not come this far to abandon you now. Archivist Yansu stood at the observation platform and watched the sky turn brown for the 47th consecutive day. The crystals along their body flickered with colors of deep sorrow as they recorded another entry into the historical archive of the Velith Collective. Day 912, since the activation of the Korath weapon. Yansu spoke into the recording device, their voice carrying the weight of a dying world. Our population continues to decline, and our projections now estimate complete extinction within 3 solar cycles. The weapon had not been a bomb or a missile or anything so simple. The Korath Dominion had activated an ancient device that poisoned the very ground of the Velith homeworld and turned their atmosphere into slow death. The crystalline forest that had stood for 10,000 generations were crumbling into dust, and the waters that once sang with bioluminescent life had gone dark and still. Yansu remembered when 12 billion Velith had called this world home, and now only 800 million remained. The young ones were dying fastest because their crystal bodies had not yet hardened enough to filter the toxins, and every day the archivists recorded more names for the memorial walls. High Resonance Counselor Tae-won summoned Yeon-su to the emergency chamber, where the remaining leaders of their civilization gathered in desperate conference. The Galactic Assembly has delivered their final response, Tae-won announced, and the colors of their crystal forms showed the purple-black of absolute despair. Yeon-su watched as the message played across the chamber walls. The assembly representative spoke in cold diplomatic language about resource allocation and strategic priorities, and the unfortunate reality that the Velith homeworld occupied space of no significant value. They expressed their condolences and wished the Velith peace in their final days. They will not help us. Counselor Min-young said, her light patterns sharp with anger. We have been members of the assembly for 600 years, and they will watch us die because we have nothing they want. The chamber fell silent as the reality settled upon them. All the Velith had always been peaceful beings who communicated through light and color, and had never developed weapons of war, and now that peace had left them defenseless and friendless, there is one option remaining. Elder Sang-hoon said from the corner of the chamber, where the oldest advisors sat in contemplation. We could broadcast an open signal into the unexplored regions. Counselor Tae-won's colors shifted to alarm. That violates every protocol of the assembly. They said, we do not know what species exist beyond the mapped territories, and an open distress signal could attract predators or conquerors. We are already dying. Elder Sang-hoon replied with the calm that comes from accepting the worst. What predator could do worse than extinction? The debate continued for hours, but in the end, there was no real choice. The Velith had nothing left to lose. Archivist Yeon-su was given the task of composing the message that would be sent into the Fontarov's unknown darkness of unexplored space. They worked for 3 days on the words and tried to capture the desperation of their people without sounding so hopeless that no one would believe salvation was possible. The message described their world and their crisis and their need, and it ended with a simple plea. If anyone can hear us, and if anyone can help us, and if anyone cares about the lives of strangers they have never met, please respond. The signal was broadcast in every frequency and every language pattern that Velith could produce. Then they waited. Yeon-su did not expect an answer because the universe had already shown them how little the lives of peaceful beings mattered to those with power. 23 days passed, and the death count continued to rise, and the sky grew darker. On the 24th day, a response came. It was not from any species in the Galactic Assembly records, and the language was strange and harsh with sounds that the Velith communication systems struggled to translate. But the message was clear enough. This is Captain Seo-jin Park of the United Earth Response Fleet, and we have received your distress signal, and we are coming to help, and please transmit your coordinates and hold on. The chamber erupted in confused light patterns as the Velith tried to understand what they were hearing. Yeon-su searched the assembly databases for any reference to Earth or humans and found only a brief entry that made their crystal body go cold with fear. Species classification: human. The entry read, Homeworld, Earth and Soul System in Category 7 Death Worlder and Threat Assessment. Extreme and behavioral. Pattern, unpredictable and violent in status. Avoid contact and do not engage. Counselor Tae-won read the same entry, and their colors shifted through every shade of terror. We have called monsters to our door, they whispered. But Elder Sang-hoon studied the human message again with careful attention. They said they are coming to help. The elder observed. The assembly calls them monsters, but monsters do not respond to strangers asking for aid. Perhaps they want something from us. Counselor Min-young suggested. Perhaps they see opportunity in our desperation. We have nothing to offer. Yeon-su pointed out. Our world is poisoned, and our people are dying. And our technology is inferior to most assembly species. And what could monsters possibly want from us? The debate might have continued forever, but another message arrived from the human vessel. We are detecting the toxin signature in your atmosphere from long-range scans. Captain Park said, our science teams are already working on neutralization methods, and our medical ships are preparing treatment protocols for crystalline biology, and we have agricultural specialists and engineers and volunteers who have asked to join this mission, and please tell us what you need, and we will bring it. Yansu could not understand what they were hearing. These humans were already working on solutions before they had even arrived, and they were bringing medical aid and agricultural help and engineers and volunteers. The word stuck in Yansu's mind because it implied people who chose to come rather than being ordered. Why would anyone volunteer to help strangers on a dying world? Yansu asked aloud. No one had an answer. A warning message arrived from the Galactic Assembly within hours of the human communication. The Velith Collective is advised that engaging with Category 7 Deathworlders carries extreme risk. The Assembly representative stated, humans are known for violence and unpredictability, and their evolutionary history on a high-gravity death world has made them physically dangerous and psychologically unstable, and the Assembly takes no responsibility for any consequences of this contact. Councilor Tae-1 wanted to send the humans away and take their chances with slow extinction rather than risk whatever these Deathworlders might do. But Archivist Yansu looked at the latest death counts and the projections for the coming months and the faces of the young ones who would never reach maturity. We have no choice. Yansu said, the Assembly has abandoned us, and these humans are the only ones who answered our call, and even if they are monsters, at least they are monsters who said yes when everyone else said no. The response was sent to Captain Park with coordinates and atmospheric data and everything the humans had requested. The reply came quickly. Understood, and we are on our way. An estimated arrival in 37 standard days. And I know you are scared, and I know you have heard terrible things about humans, and I promise you this. We did not come all this way to hurt you. And we came because you asked for help, and because helping is what we do, and hold on, and we are coming. Yansu recorded the message in the archive and added their own notation. Day 935, and against all probability, and against all wisdom, and against the warnings of the entire galaxy, and we have placed our survival in the hands of humans, and may whatever powers exist in the universe have mercy on us all.